You ever hang on to a pile of leftover wood and think, yeah, someday I'll probably use it? Well, today's the day. I got a mix of leftover softwoods from past builds, a pine shelf, some cedar from some old planter boxes, and a few 2x4 cutoffs. Nothing fancy, just some pine, spruce, and cedar. So I figured, why not turn this oddball mix of wood into something usable? Maybe even something cool. Because this old shoe rack I threw in this closet years ago, well, it's time it gets the boot. So in today's video, I'm going to give those leftovers new life by building a custom shoe rack that actually deserves a spot at the front door. I started by cutting all my cedar 1x4s, 8 pieces at 24 inches and 4 at 15 inches. Next, I broke down that old pine shelf into 3 equal lengths, exactly 31 7/8. Over to the table saw, I set the blade to 45 degrees and ripped a clean bevel along both edges of the cedar pieces. Now I've only had this table saw for about 6 months and I'm still not fully used to it being a left tilt model. Not sure if it's safer or just more awkward, but it definitely takes some getting used to. If you've got any experience with left tilt saws, drop me a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts or tips. Next, I'm gluing up the inside flats of all the cedar pieces, and you should end up with 4 24-inch lengths and 2 15-inch pieces. These will form the 2 leg assemblies for the rack. Now you could just build these legs out of solid 2x3s or 2x4s and make life easy, but I'm working with leftover materials, which means this DIY is definitely a little more complicated than it really needs to be. Over to the table saw, I grabbed my 2x4 cutoffs and started cutting the inlays that'll fit into the cedar grooves. I did a couple test passes to dial in that perfect triangle fit, then ripped down all the pieces and glued them in. And of course, didn't have enough clamps on hand, story of every DIYer's life, so I used masking tape to hold everything tight while it dried. Once the leg pieces were fully dried, I took about a 1/4 inch off each side on the table saw, and that exposed the darker cedar edge against the lighter spruce. And honestly, I love that contrast. I only took off enough to show about a 1/4 inch of cedar, but if you want more of that warm tone to pop, you could definitely take off a bit more. And here's a quick look at that 1/4 inch reveal up close. Then it was over to the miter saw to square up both ends and bring everything down to a clean final length, which is 23 inches even. Here I'm adding a 45-degree miter on one end of each of the 4 upright legs, and also miters on both ends of the 2 15-inch horizontal pieces. This is just going to create the leg structure for each side of our shoe bench. One of our 3 sheets of pine shelving. That will start the first shelf, the second shelf, and the third shelf. I've went ahead and put our measurements exactly 2 inches down, 2 inches up from the bottom, and then centered the middle shelf, dead center of those 2 shelves. Now we'll just go ahead and take a router and route out these sections. I'm just gluing the miter legs together. I figure once I add the shelves and the glue to those 2, the whole thing should be rock solid. And we also want to check the miter on the other side. And it looks tight. A little bit off on the level, but we can sand that down. I always like to just sand the miters while the glue is still wet. That way the dust from the sanding can kind of integrate with the glue, and then everything stains up the same color. And you can kind of see exactly what I'm talking about, where the miter just kind of disappears. Everything is level. Alright, the glue is dried, so we can take off the clamps, give everything a quick once over with 150 grit sandpaper. Gotta remember, cedar is really soft, so it doesn't need much. You also might have noticed I added a 1-inch strip at the bottom of the legs. Probably not totally necessary, but I figured it couldn't hurt to make it a bit stronger. And also, this is the only spot in the whole build where I did use screws underneath, and I angled them into the leg from the underside. Everything else is just glued. All right, time for the exciting part. Putting it all together and praying it actually fits. Shelves go in their slots. Let's check for square, no wobbles, and then, if all is good, clamps on before it becomes some kind of abstract furniture. Now for the finish, I'm applying teak oil. And I know you may be wondering why, given its association with outdoor furniture. Well, here's the deal. Teak oil isn't just for teak. It's a blend of oils and resins designed to penetrate deep into wood, enhancing its natural grain and providing a protective layer. Super useful because the shoes, a lot of times, are going to be wet from being outside. Now, cedar has its own natural oils, but this just ties the whole piece together, giving it extra durability and a warm, rich look that really pops. Well, that's a wrap, folks. Thanks for watching. Smash that like button, drop a comment, and hit subscribe. You know the drill. And while you're working on that, let's check out some close-ups of this finished shoe rack.